Not too long ago, we counted down the most lopsided games of the entire Super Bowl era. While those games were clearly mismatches, lots of other games have been much more even. In fact, there have been some games between two teams that were on downright level terms. That is what we will be looking at today as we count down the 10 closest matchups of the Super Bowl era. And we will be doing that through the use of C-Score. C-Score is a metric created by this channel to evaluate teams by doing so much more than simply just looking at their records. For a more thorough explanation of how C-Score works, be sure to check out the description of this video. All we're doing here is taking the difference in C-Score between the two teams in question. The smaller that difference is, the more evenly matched the teams are. The games themselves may not always be nail-biters, but just counting down every 1-point game in league history would be pretty boring. Thank you for joining us today. Let's do the whole thing here. Like, share, subscribe, and ding that notification bell. It really helps out the channel and, quite frankly, keeps us alive and able to make more videos. Let's get on with it then. We'll start things off here at number 10 with a matchup that's probably going to come as a surprise to most, if not all of you. This is from the 2009 season in Week 16. This is the Indianapolis Colts hosting the New York Jets. The Colts entered this game at 14-0, while the Jets were just sitting at 7-7. But the difference in C-Score between these two squads was only 0.02 points. It was in this 2009 season that the Indianapolis Colts advanced to the Super Bowl, ending the year at 14-2 without exactly stellar numbers across the board, and being unable to win that Super Bowl, leaving them in the end with a C-Score of 19.211. The Jets, on the other hand, fought their way into the playoffs and, despite only being 9-7, actually put out a better point differential than the Colts while playing a much harder schedule. They got to the AFC Championship game, where they fell to Indy, leaving their C-Score at 19.191. Now, in this game between them, the Colts led 15-10, but at that point in the game, they pulled all their starters in preparation for the playoffs. The Jets rallied off 19 straight points for the 29-15 victory. We're skipping ahead to number 8 here because we have a tie for this spot. First, we're going to look at this late season matchup, Week 15 in 1989, between the Minnesota Vikings and the Cleveland Browns. Minnesota entered this game at 9-5, while the Browns were 7-6-1. The difference in C-Score between the two is 0.019. The 1989 Vikings were a good team, 10-6 plus 76 in the point differential, but by far they are most known for making an in-season trade for Dallas Cowboys running back Herschel Walker that simultaneously made the Cowboys into a dynasty. Minnesota ended the season with a C-Score of 10.816. For the Browns, they went 9-6-1 with a pretty good point differential, led by their defense. This was the third time in 4 seasons that they made the AFC Championship game. It was also the third time in 4 seasons they lost that game to the Denver Broncos. They ended with a C-Score of 10.797. Now, this game was at Cleveland, and the Browns sent it to overtime with a late field goal. It was in overtime that linebacker Van Waiters made the only reception of his entire NFL career, doing so on a fake field goal for the 23-17 Cleveland victory. Our other matchup at number 8 is actually a divisional matchup, so we're going to get 2 of them in the same entry. This is from 2006. The first matchup happened in Week 5, and the second matchup was in Week 16, a Christmas Day special. This is from the NFC East. We're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. The first matchup was in Philly, with the Eagles coming in at 3-1 and the Cowboys at 2-1. The second matchup on Christmas was in Dallas. Philly entered that game 8-6, while Dallas entered 9-5. Naturally, just like the other entry at number 8, the C-score spread between these two is 0.019. The 2006 Eagles had a nice bounce back after their rough 2005 campaign. They went 10-6, finished in the top half of the league in both scoring and points allowed, landing themselves a C-score of 8.652. Dallas, on the other hand, fell behind Philly in the standings at 9-5, but it was a lot closer in terms of C-score. They actually had a better point differential and put together a quite respectable C-score of 8.633. That said, Philly had the clear advantage in both games on the field. They actually trailed their home game 21-17 before turning it around and ending it with a pick six to win 38-24. The next game in Dallas was much more defensive. They held the Cowboys to just 201 yards of offense in a 23-7 win. We're getting ourselves another divisional matchup here for our number 7 entry. October 21st, 2001, Week 6 was the setting for their first matchup. The second matchup took place later in the year, December 9th, 2001, Week 13. This was actually in the NFC West. The last season these two teams were in that division, the New Orleans Saints and the Atlanta Falcons. New Orleans got the first game at home at 3-1, while the Falcons were 2-3. The second matchup in Atlanta saw both teams sitting at 6-5. The difference in C-score between these two division rivals was just 0.013. The 2001 Saints were coming off the first season in their franchise history that included a playoff victory. They didn't bounce back as well as they would have hoped this year, going 7-9, putting together a pretty low C-score for that record of negative 11.915. Atlanta was not to be outdone, also going 7-9, but putting together a pretty low C-score themselves, mostly on account of that bad negative 86 point differential and bottom 10 finishes in both points scored and points allowed. Their C-score was 11.928. That first matchup was in New Orleans, but Atlanta took the lead within 2 minutes, entered the fourth quarter tied at 10 apiece before winning the game 20-13. The return matchup in Atlanta this time went to New Orleans, who had themselves a big fourth quarter, capping off a 28-10 victory. We only need to go back one season for our number 6 entry. This was during the 2000 NFL campaign, and in Week 8 we had a matchup between the 5-2 Washington Redskins going on the road to take on the 2-5 Jacksonville Jaguars. Despite their disparate records at this point, the C-score difference by the end of things between these two was just 0.011. These were the early days of the Daniel Snyder ownership era for the Washington Redskins, where hope was still very high for the franchise. They were pretty much just above average this year, finishing 8-8, getting a plus 12 point differential with a middle-of-the-road schedule and a C-score of 1.782. The Jaguars were coming off the most successful season in franchise history, but had a hard time following it up. They played quite well, outscoring their opponents by 40 points, but only managing a 7-9 record. They checked in with a C-score of 1.771. Washington had a 3-game advantage on the Jaguars coming into this game, and they left it with a 4-game advantage, winning it 35-16. It was after this game where both teams started heading back toward 500. Well, it had been too long since we had a divisional matchup, so we're going to be getting ourselves another one here at the number 5 entry. These were two early season matchups. First, Week 2, September 8th, 1996, and just 3 weeks later, Week 5, still in September, you're not going to see that anymore, of 1996. This was a matchup in the old NFC Central between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Detroit Lions. Both of these teams were 0-1 heading into their first matchup. Tampa was still winless at 0-4 heading into the second one, while Detroit had leveled up to 2-2. The difference in C-score between these two teams, exactly 1/100th of a point. Both teams were in the negatives, but Tampa was slightly less negative. They were the lowest scoring team in the league at 6-10, but their defense was picking things up and they did play the fourth hardest schedule in the league. That got them a C-score of -9.261. Detroit also played a difficult schedule, 6th hardest in the league, but had a slightly worse record by the end of things at 5-11. Their C-score was -9.271. All that said, Tampa was still working things out before beginning a turnaround to their season. Detroit scored 21 straight points at home to win the first game 21-6. Then they went on the road in Tampa and had a much easier time of things, winning in a 27-0 shutout. Let's have ourselves another divisional matchup in our number 4 spot, and let's have it in the NFC Central once again. The first game was November 6, 2000, that was Week 10. These two teams would match up again on December 17, 2000 in Week 16, the second to last week of the season. We are talking about the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings. Green Bay was only 3-5 heading into the first matchup, with Minnesota at 7-1. Green Bay was slightly better the second time around at 7-7, while Minnesota stood tall at 11-3. All that said though, these two teams only had a C-score differential of 0.006. In Green Bay's case, their C-score told us that they were better than their record, going 9-7, a moderately good plus 30 point differential, the 12th hardest schedule in the league, giving them a 5.687. Minnesota, on the other hand, was 11-5 with an inferior point differential to Green Bay. They also had an inferior strength of schedule and weren't so good at stopping teams from scoring. They wind up with a C-score of 5.681. That first game in Green Bay is actually a pretty well-known game. The Packers wound up winning it 26-20 in overtime, with Antonio Freeman making the "he did what" catch to win the game. When they played in Minnesota, it was a less memorable game, but it was also close, and Green Bay finished off the sweep with a 33-28 victory. The countdown is going to have itself another tie as we jump straight ahead to number 2, and we're going back in time here. October 19th, 1975. This Week 5 matchup was between two very good teams, the 3-1 Oakland Raiders and the 4-0 Cincinnati Bengals. How close were these two teams in C-score this season? How about 0.002 points in separation? Oakland was on the verge of finally breaking through and winning a Super Bowl the next season, but they were still mighty good in 1975, going 11-3 and outscoring their opponents by 120 points. Only a soft strength of schedule kept their C-score from being even higher at 17.958. The Bengals, on the other hand, did have a strong strength of schedule and were top 10 finishers in both points scored and points allowed. Also at 11-3, they just missed Oakland's C-score total themselves at 17.956. As far as this matchup goes, it was the 5th game of the season, and for Oakland, they traveled to Cincinnati for what was their 5th straight road game to start the season, something we will probably, most likely, never see again. It was a bit of a messy game with 9 total turnovers. It was a Cincinnati pick 6 by Marvin Cobb in the third quarter that proved the winning points in a 14-10 Bengals victory. The matchup in our other number 2 entry is again a divisional matchup. 2 later season matchups between these two teams. First, Week 11 on November 22nd, 2015, and because we are now in the era of divisional matchups always ending the season, we have a Week 17 matchup on January 3rd, 2016. It's not the NFC Central anymore, but it's still the same two teams now in the NFC North, the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings. Green Bay entered the first game in Minnesota at 6-3, while the Vikings were 7-2. The return match was in Green Bay, with both teams at 10-5, battling it out for the division title. And once again, because this is a tie, the C-score difference between these two teams is 0.002. Green Bay was a mostly above average team throughout 2015, as demonstrated by their 10-6 record. They did play the 6th hardest schedule in the league, and that got their C-score up to 13.802. Minnesota's schedule was slightly weaker, but they performed better on the whole, ending the year at 11-5 and finishing 5th in points allowed. But their C-score just misses Green Bay's at a 13.8 flat. Minnesota did not have a good time hosting Green Bay in the first game, as the Packers smacked them around in a 30-13 victory. But when they played in Green Bay, they took a 20-3 lead before putting the Packers down in the end by a final score of 20-13. Leading up to our number 1 entry, we've had a few different matchups that were random and a few that were divisional opponents. This one files a little bit more under random. There are two teams from the AFC getting together in Week 15 on December 14th, 2004. These are the Tennessee Titans and the Oakland Raiders, both of whom were 4-9 entering this game. The question now remains, did these teams have equal C-scores, or was there the tiniest of differences? We've got the tiniest of differences. 0.001 points of C-score between these two. And it was Tennessee who led the way with their negative 12.245, going 5-11, getting outscored by 95 points, but playing the league's 10th hardest schedule. Oakland played a much harder schedule, 2nd hardest in the league, and were able to put up decent offensive numbers. The defense, of course, let them down all the way. They were 5-11, outscored by 122 points. Their C-score, slightly worse than Tennessee's, negative 12.246. That said, the game itself was an entertaining affair. It was a wild aerial show. 863 total passing yards, 9 total touchdown passes. The game was tied 3 different times, but the Raiders never trailed, and they held on to win it 40-35. With these 10 entries, we did have 5 different divisional matchups. That gave us 15 different games. Not surprisingly, 13 of them have been in the post-free agency and salary cap era, where parity is, at least theoretically, supposed to be more prevalent. Exactly 0 of the teams that were featured in this countdown went on to win the Super Bowl that season, with only the Indianapolis Colts of 2009 making it there. That number 10 entry between the Colts and the Jets represented the 2 best teams on the countdown, while, ironically, the 2 worst teams in the countdown checked in at number 1, the 04 Raiders and the 04 Titans. Let me know your thoughts about anything that was revealed in this video. I suppose it would have been quite difficult to predict who would have been on it, but still I will ask, were there any surprises? Was there anything you expected to see but didn't? Do you think 2 teams this season can have matchups this close by the time things are said and done? Let me know your thoughts about this or anything else you may have on your mind right down there in the comments section below. Thank you once again for taking the time to join us today, and until next time, I hope you have an awesome day.